Hi everyone! I hope you had fun watching this sequence of I Love Lucy.
Fine, you're doing splendidly.
It's grammar time. So we'll be talking about the segment you just watched from the perspective of time. So when we think about time, we think in terms of past, future, and present. So let's analyze the segment in terms of how it develops. First, we need to understand that everything developed in the past. So this is the tense we're going to be analyzing. There is a sequence of actions that happened in the past. You and I now are talking about this because we are in the present. I'm using this purple circle there to represent the present, and everything that happened before it is past. So I Love Lucy. Let's talk about the segment. First, their manager introduced them to the wrapping department, remember? And then the manager explained to the girls how the system works and what their job is. Next, the manager left the room. She needed to check the switch, remember? And then they started to gossip. Oh, I had been kicked out before coming here. This is the sequence of actions that happen in the first part of the segment. But then somebody could just look at the sequence and say, wait, they were working at a conveyor belt, right? So there are lots of things for you to be paying attention. How were they able to gossip? And then somebody might answer, when they started to gossip, the manager had left the room. She was not there. So this is why they were able to gossip. Now, when you look at this sentence, which action happened first? They starting to gossip or the manager leaving the room? That's right. The first thing that happens is the manager leaving the room. This is the first action. And then they started to gossip. This is the second action. No matter the order of the sentence, we know that the first action is the manager had left the room. And the second action is they started to gossip. You can see that in the timeline, right? When they started to gossip, the manager had left the room. When you look at the sentence, it feels like there is something different between the two actions. And this is why, because in the first action, we're using had and left. The manager had left the room. In the first action, we are using past perfect. Whereas in the second action, we are using simple past. Today, we are going to understand a little bit about what past perfect is. What do we use past perfect for? We use past perfect when you're already talking about an action in the past. So, when they started to gossip, this is past, right? And you want to emphasize an action that happened even earlier than that one. Use it to show what is the first action in a sequence of actions in the past. In this sequence of actions, everything is in the past, but some actions happened earlier than others. So if you're contrasting two of them and you want to say which one happened first, you need to use past perfect. Now, how do we form the past perfect? The manager had left the room. You will need a subject. You will need auxiliary had. Had will be working as an auxiliary there. And you need verb in the past participle form. The manager had left the room. You will need a subject. You will need auxiliary had. Now you'll probably remember this chart I showed you some time ago, in which I said form and tenses are not the same thing. We are studying the past perfect tense. But in what form should the verb be? The verb should be in the past participle form. Just like in present perfect, you need to use the verb in past participle form. For passive voice, you would need to use the verb in past participle form. And for past perfect, you will also need to use the verb in the past participle form. So for example, in the verb leave, you have it here. What's the past participle form? Left. If the verb was eat, what's the past participle form? Eaten. Subject, auxiliary had, verb in the past participle form. Now let's check what happened in the second part of the segment. Let's see if you remember. The manager told them that they could be fired if they didn't do their job properly. Next, the candy started to come through very fast, so they got really desperate. And then they dropped the candy into their cook's caps because they were desperate. They were afraid they might lose their job. And then finally, the manager came back. So this is the sequence for the second part of the segment, right? Now let's compare these two past actions here. This is the first action, and this is the second action. How could I make a sentence establishing the relationship between them? It would be something like this. When their manager came back, they had dropped the candy into their caps. Yes, they had dropped the candy into their caps. This is the first action. So this is where I use past perfect. And then the manager came back. Why do I need to start with the second action and then just show the first action? No, you could just say they had dropped the candy into their caps when their manager came back. So you could have the first action appearing first and the second action appearing next. The only important thing is that you mark the first action by using past perfect. So this is the sentence we have. When their manager came back, they had dropped the candy into their caps. Here we are using the time expression when to establish the relationship between them. But you can use other time expressions. There are other time expressions that are usually associated with past perfect. You could say, for example, by the time their manager came back, they had dropped the candy into their caps. Bem na hora que ela chegou. By the time. Or you could say, they had dropped the candy into their caps before their manager came back. So you could establish the relationship using before or after their manager came back, after they had dropped the candy into their caps. By the time, before, and after are very common time expressions. Now, past perfect shouldn't be difficult because we have this in Portuguese. Quando minha mãe chegou, a gente já tinha arrumado a casa toda. Quando meu amigo chegou, a festa já tinha acabado. Você tem duas ações no passado e você quer marcar qual delas aconteceu primeiro. Let me make a little bit clearer to you by showing you an actual factual example. Before I lived in the US, I had already learned English. So, what do you have here? First, I learned English, and then I moved to the US. So this is why I have past perfect there, because this is the first action, and this is the second action. Okay, you could invert it. I had already learned English before I lived in the US. Now, another fact I would like to share with you is that before I lived in the US, I had never heard about I Love Lucy. So, again, first action, never hearing about it. And then second action, moving to the US. So, two other time expressions that are very common in past perfect, already and never. So, for example, quando minha mãe chegou, a festa já tinha acabado. We use this to emphasize it, right? Okay, so I could say, before I lived in the US, I had never heard about I Love Lucy, or I could use past perfect in the negative form. So it would be something like this. Before I lived in the US, I hadn't heard about I Love Lucy. So past perfect in the negative form is very simple. You will just need a subject. You will just need had not or hadn't as the auxiliary. You could contract it. And verb in the past participle form. Now for the question forms, this is what somebody could ask me. Newton, had you learned English before you moved to the US? Something like, você já tinha aprendido antes de se mudar para os Estados Unidos? Two actions in the past, right? Had you learned English before you moved to the US? So what do you need here? This is a question, so auxiliary moves to the front part of the sentence. So, had, auxiliary, subject, plus verb in the past participle form. Had you learned English before you moved to the US? And I could answer, yes, I had. Or somebody could ask me, had you heard about I Love Lucy before you moved to the US? And I would answer, no, I hadn't. Now let's revisit these two sentences from the previous step. I had asked you to tell me which of these sentences is true and which is false according to what you had seen. And the sentences are, they dropped the candy into their cook's caps and stuffed them down in their blouses when their manager had come back. Or, by the time the manager came back, they had dropped the candy into their cook's caps and stuffed them down in their blouses. If you want, you could pause it a little bit just to remember which sentences are these, and you could analyze which one is true. Okay, so if you're done, this one is false, and this one is true. And how do I know this? Because I watched the segment.
splendidly.
First, they had dropped the candy. So this is the first action. And then I know that only later did the manager come back. So this would be the right sentence. Past perfect is not difficult because we do have it in Portuguese. The problem is that at some point students start to mix up past perfect, present perfect, simple past, past continuous. Oh my god, it's too much. So this is what I recommend you do. No matter at what stage you are with your English, it's always a nice idea to go back and revisit all the grammar you have already seen so far. EnglishPage.com is a very nice website for you to do that. If you click here on verb tenses, you will be able to see a lot of tutorials on all the verb tenses you have learned so far. So what I recommend you do here is, you see here verb tense exercise 11. This is an exercise contrasting simple past and past perfect. If you click on past perfect, you will be able to read a tutorial. Their tutorials are very simple, straight to the point, and with lots of examples. So I recommend you read it, and I recommend you do their exercises here, okay? You will be able to contrast simple past and past perfect. Their exercises are not normally so easy. If you do well at this activity, you can say, wow, I really understand how past perfect works. So this is it, everybody. I know many of you had already got familiar with the past perfect some time before. I know many of you had already learned how to use the past perfect. But it's never too late to revisit it and understand a bit better how you can improve your understanding and also how you can improve your teaching skills in order to teach your students or future students. I hope you like it. See you next time.